Welcome to another episode of Talking Fast, a Gilmore Girls podcast. I'm Suzanne.
And I'm Alexis. Today we'll be discussing the season 1 pilot and episode 2, the Lorelai's first day at Chilton.
So welcome to our first segment, which is Talk Fast, in which we attempt to recap both episodes in 30 seconds. We've taken this strategy from Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. It'll be a challenge, but we'll give it our best shots. Would you like to go first, Alexis?
Yeah, I'm both nervous and excited for my first Talking Fast attempt.
It'll be scary.
Do you have a timer ready for me?
Yep.
30 seconds.
Okay, ready?
Tell me. Yes.
Go.
So we meet Rory and Lorelai in Luke's diner. They're a mother and daughter. They're both hit on by the same guy. Then, I probably got to go faster. Then Lorelai works at an inn. Rory's been accepted to Chilton. They need money. They ask their parents for money. They have Friday night dinners. Rory has a crush, so she doesn't want to go, but then she does want to go, so she has her first day at Chilton, and it's a bit rough. They drink coffee at Luke's diner at the end. And yeah, do I have any more time?
Nope, that's it.
Okay.
It's so hard to do 2 episodes, especially. Okay.
Yeah, so let's see if you can do better. I don't know if it'll be hard to do better than that, but I will, let's see, I'll get a timer going for you. So, on your mark.
I've suddenly forgotten both episodes.
Okay, on your mark, get set, go.
Okay, we pan into Stars Hollow and we meet Lorelai and Rory, and they're having coffee together. We get a little bit of intro of their characters and the other characters. We meet Suki, Michelle, and Lane, and Dean stands and agape at Rory as she walks into the high school. And then we find out Rory's been accepted to Chilton. Lorelai has to ask for money from her parents, who are rich. And then they have, in episode 2, their first day at Chilton, and Lorelai forgets her clothes. And some weird guy hits on Lorelai on the first day as well. Rory is called Mary, and she meets Paris. Oh.
That was 30 seconds.
Oh, it's so hard. Okay, let's slow down and look at the main points of the episodes. Let's get everything that we missed in our 30-second recaps.
Right. We might be, avid fans of the show, but we're not quite as good at talking fast as a Gilmore. So yeah. I agree. Let's go a bit slower. Let's hit a few of the main moments from episode 1 and 2. And I think the first thing I'd like to bring up is a sort of iconic scene I feel like is in a lot of our memories of the very opening scene of the whole show, in which we meet Lorelai and Rory, and there's the humorous scene of that guy hitting on both of them. And we also have Luke there too. So I feel like what a crucial scene in terms of character as well as tone. What stands out to you about that main moment, that first scene?
I think that one of the reasons I remember that scene the most is honestly because Netflix plays that scene as the preview every time I go onto Netflix and hover over Gilmore Girls. But I'm also always really surprised at the casual grossness of the guy hitting on Lorelai and then Rory and saying he's got a friend. That just seems so extremely gross to me.
Right.
He also talks about how she doesn't look old enough to be a mom, so how old does he think Rory is?
Yeah, and even at the point when and I don't know this guy's name, I think creepy dude is enough to describe him, but he doesn't even back off when Lorelai says that's her daughter. It's not until she says that she's 16 that he really leaves the door at that point. So you're right, for the first scene and for the scene to be a Netflix preview, it's interesting that it's surrounding this fairly creepy interaction that isn't necessarily what you might expect of Gilmore Girls throughout the rest of the series, although I'm happy to talk about Tristan in a moment. So maybe creepy dudes hitting on people is a recurring issue that's explored.
Yeah, I'd also made a note of the creepy dude who hits on Lorelai at Chilton. So And I do think it's something that happens more in the first couple episodes and kind of like tapers off, or at least becomes like more isolated in later episodes. But we definitely get like our first meeting of these two characters is seeing them, I don't know, as I guess sexual objects, even though Rory is 16.
I'm glad you connect that to the dad at Chilton who hits on Lorelai as well, because I think that is a central part of her character that perhaps the show is trying to show us early on. Like, Lorelai is a mom who dates, you know, she's a cool mom. She has prospects. She's out there. She's flirty. And in a way, I think we see her with a lot of agency in pursuing those romantic relationships. But in that scene, as you're talking about, it's definitely more objectified than it will be, I think, at later moments. Like, even though we might think that dad is a bit creepy for, like, pursuing her instantly, she is, like, very into him as well. Like, we see her desire there, and ultimately she pulls back because she doesn't want to get entangled with, like, someone in Rory's life, which is ironic, considering Max Medina will be coming up later on. That's a teacher at the school, but anyway.
Yeah, I also think it's interesting, like, the first male character who's actually going to be a character in the show that we meet is Luke, who, like, we all know from the very first episode is going to be a love interest for Lorelai, although she doesn't even hint at that until the end of episode 2, but yeah, and he gives off a totally different vibe in comparison with these kind of creepy guys. But he's also still pining for her, as we find out later down the line. Poor Luke.
I actually forgot that they foreshadowed the Luke and Lorelai romantic relationship as early on as the first 2 episodes, especially with the joke at the end of episode 2 where Rory says to Lorelai that she can't date Luke because they won't be able to go to the diner anymore, basically. And I mean, that does happen in a way later on. Yeah. And Lorelai asked Rory if she thinks Luke is cute, which is like, oh, so she, this is something in the works in a small way that they'll really pick up later on to become, one of the biggest couples of the show. So it's all there from the first scene. Do we want to move to our next main moment?
Yeah. Okay, so this is actually a very important moment to me, which is when we go to the hotel, the Independence Inn, and meet Michelle and Sookie. And this is important to me because I worked at hotels at the front desk for like 3 or 4 years, and I empathize with Michelle a lot because it's terrible when people are like expect you to just magic rooms into existence. And I mean, he definitely, would be fired in any other place, but I understand his attitude towards guests.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. The meeting of Michelle and Sookie is just truly a delight to just see their characters on the screen again. From my memories of them, it's like, oh, this is when we meet them, and they're 2 of my favorite characters, and I'm sure you probably agree. And it's just really interesting to see the beginning of this, like, Lorelai and Sookie relationship as well. Like, they're still at the Independence Inn, not yet the Dragonfly Inn, so it's really cool to see, like, the roots of where they began together and, like, knowing where they're gonna go.
Yeah. This is, from episode 2, so I'm kind of jumping around, but I love the Sookie and Jackson introduction where we meet them as a strange kind of like antagonistic relationship. And I love that in these first 2 episodes, they're already telling us exactly who to ship with Sookie and Jackson and Luke and Lorelai. Like, we know that's who we're going to be rooting for the rest of at least the first season. I don't remember exactly when they finally get together. It might be the second season, but yeah, they're great characters.
Yeah, like, not only do we have a sense of I think with our hindsight, we can definitely pick up on this. Like, they had a firm sense of where they were going with so many of these relationships and character arcs, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Yeah, and the real turning point, like the reason we are joining, is like the next big thing that happens. We find out Rory's been accepted to Chilton, and this changes absolutely everything, and is basically the whole reason for the show. I I went to a public school, so I can't believe that they spend so much money on Chilton.
I agree. I also went to a public school. It's such a different world that she's entering, and it's like it's a really good premise for the show as well. I love the line about Suki, to celebrate Suki's saying that, I think, what does she say about Protestants? Protestants love cookies. Doesn't she say she's gonna make cookies to celebrate because Protestants love cookies? I think that's the line.
Oh my god, Suki. This is probably something we can talk about in one of our later segments, but it just makes me think also, like, Lorelai is definitely doing what's best for Rory, and it's good that she's being challenged, but it also is like the first step to getting into Harvard, which really kind of emphasizes the inequalities in the education system.
Mm-hmm. We could very much imagine an alternate reality in which Rory stayed at Stars Hollow High and what her life might have looked like. Would she have still been so lucky as to get into Harvard, Yale, and Stanford, even though Paris doesn't get into Harvard? I don't know. Like, it's hard to know, but you're right. It sets forward this theme of privilege and entitlement that will really be explored to different levels of success by the show as the seasons go on, and even the revival.
Yeah.
I think another main moment I would love to bring up on the topic of Rory getting into Chilton is that this soon makes Lorelai realize when she opens that bill for the first time that she cannot actually afford on her own to have Rory go to Chilton. And so this brings us, of course, to the Gilmore family home. What are your thoughts? Can you unpack for us a little bit? Like, what is the relationship there between Lorelai and her parents, Emily and Richard?
Well, we get a lot of info dumping, as they say. We find out, like, just from their conversations, basically what happened in the very beginning, and we get a lot more of it also later on when they're having their fight during the first Friday night dinner, but we find out that Lorelai was brought up in this super privileged and rich environment and then willingly left, and it just kind of, it's like she lives, I don't know, kind of in a chosen poverty in a way, when she leaves when she's 16, although she has plenty of reasons for it because her parents, didn't let her be herself, basically. So I think it's very interesting that she's going back to ask for money so that Rory can basically do what she left and live the life that she left. I don't think it's ever really seen in that way by Lorelai, at least not for a while, that Rory's living the life that Lorelai should have lived.
I'm glad that you point out, like, that this was Lorelai's willing decision after a very controlled childhood and adolescence that she chooses to leave. In a moment of crisis, though, certainly, where she's become pregnant at about 16, I believe, and is basically forced to either accept another controlling life in which she's supposed to get married to Christopher, and what kind of life will they live, or she can choose that, to go out and support herself and become ultimately, though, this very, like, self-made sort of character who's I think we see, like, it's her ultimate strength is that she is so reliant and capable, so good at her job too. But then on the flip side, it's also maybe perhaps a weakness of her character is that sort of pride that causes this friction between her and her mom, Emily. Like, I think we get the sense that perhaps they could have repaired things a bit if either of them was willing to like have less pride, but they're both so strong-willed, so stubborn, so prideful that there's been this like what we see in episode 1 is like this like decades long fight that has basically continued a very cold and distant relationship.
Yeah, except for lobster puffs. Apparently they still have lobster puffs between them. I can't get over the fact that that's mentioned in episode 2 by the principal. I want to know what lobster puffs taste like.
Yeah, maybe we should have them during an episode and we can give a review for all of our listeners of lobster puffs.
Though we don't live in Connecticut, and I'm imagining lobster in the Midwest isn't as good.
Yeah, I don't think Emily Gilmore would buy lobster from the Midwest.
Yeah, that's true. But it's interesting because this goes into one of our next things, like main events that happens in this first episode, which is Rory meeting Dean and then deciding that she doesn't necessarily want to leave the high school because Dean, who's a towering 90s boy basically with that hair, he seems to have a crush on her. And so this kind of makes Rory reluctant, and I think it starts an argument between Rory and Lorelai that Lorelai's just like, well, I gave up so much just now to get you to go to Chilton, including these Friday night dinners, and you're kind of about to throw it away for a towering 90s boy.
And we don't see fights between Lorelai and Rory often. Mm-hmm. And when we do, they're like mega drama. It's so intense and it like ricochets throughout. It's like, it's so interesting then that like we start with that fight. And it's very interesting recurring themes of like mother and daughter control and versus free will. And I think Lorelai has tried to do the opposite of Emily for so long, like totally let Rory do her thing. And in some ways it's like Rory, we're shown she's the responsible one and Lorelai is the irresponsible one. It's not always that simple, but I think we get that message early on. And so it's interesting that this fight is like Lorelai putting her foot down, which she rarely does, and is saying like, this is my, like she says, normally, you know, it could be a democracy, but I'm like, this is the dictatorship of motherhood. Like, I'm putting my foot down. You're going to Chilton.
That kind of brings us towards the end of the first episode. Somehow. The first episode ends with that iconic scene of them chatting in Luke's diner, which then makes its way into the opening credits montage. It always looks so cozy and so nice. Even though, so this is a qualm I have with the show. Supposedly it starts like in the beginning of a school year, maybe like mid to late September or something. And it's freezing. Like one of the first line that Rory says is it's freezing. And I just have an issue with this because right now we're in the beginning of September and it's 88 degrees outside and I'm just bitter about it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's way too hot and humid in the Midwest. I'm not sure. Is Stars Hollow, is it really that, temperature when it's September for them? Is it a case of the fictional TV show in which it's like always the temperature that's good for that storyline at that time, or whatever costuming they wanted to do? Either way, it's very, very idyllic in so many different ways, that ending scene. But, I think what's funny then, since we watched the pilot and episode 2 back to back, we have a very peaceful, lovely ending to that episode after, they've patched things up on their fight. And then we get into episode 2, which has a very stressful scene, a stressful main moment that Lorelai has, she meant to wake up early so she could shower, get dressed, get coffee. She either slept through her alarm or her fuzzy alarm didn't buzz loudly enough to wake her up. And she's late to take Rory to Chilton. So they're like madly scrambling to get out the door. Rory is stressed beyond belief. And Lorelai puts on this fantastically awful but wonderful outfit of boots, it looks like, and shorts and a hot pink t-shirt. And they have to head to Chilton for Rory's first day of school.
I just don't understand. She woke up wearing pajamas. Why didn't she wear those pajamas rather than wear this outfit? Which is like, I mean, it's definitely just like for, optics, but it's ridiculous. It doesn't. My gosh, Lorelai, and it's not shorts. It's like short shorts, which of course is why the creepy guy hits on her at Chilton. Strange.
I think it's supposed to be this like very unique mother-daughter relationship, like, and it's used, this extreme situation is used to be like, oh, look at Rory, this very responsible person, compared to Lorelai, especially then as we find out that Emily Gilmore, the grandma, is at the school too. And it's, I think, really interesting to think about the roles that they're supposed to be playing. And Emily, it seems to be like she's got this under control. She's like so at home and comfortable in this really elite upper class private school environment, and Lorelai has purposefully left that, but that doesn't stop her from being like so uncomfortable and out of place as she goes into Chilton. Also, while Rory, like, even though she was dressed for the day, she's wearing her uniform, which is perhaps her like camouflage into the world. She's also trying to like figure out, can she feel comfortable? Can she learn the social ways of Chilton as well? It's really interesting.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder, like, I think especially as the show goes on, we could definitely make arguments for whether or not their relationship is actually good or not. But I think it's so interesting, and I just wonder sometimes what a child psychologist would say if they had somebody like Rory come in with a mother like Lorelai. Like, I mean, there are so many positives to their relationship, but then there are also so many, like, boundaries and things that just don't happen between the two of them that make Rory act like an adult from so early. Well, attempt to act like an adult.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think perhaps it also gets more complicated as the show goes on too. Like, perhaps this is a simplification of the relationship. Like, oh, irresponsible mom, responsible daughter. Is it good? Is it bad? But then later on, they get to develop that a lot more, which I think is great. It is one of my favorite mother-daughter relationships of TV. Like, I don't know if I could even name any other ones. It's so compelling, so interesting to watch. But you're right. I would be curious to talk to the child psychologist about it. Maybe we can have an episode about that later on. Interview someone.
Yeah, it's interesting that this whole show is basically about how daughters deal with their mothers. Because, like, Lorelai's main antagonist through all of this is also her mom. I mean, Lorelai and Rory are not antagonistic, but Lorelai and Emily do not get along, to say the least.
Yeah, and that the mother-daughter relationship also produces the conflict of so much of this too. Like, the mother trying to do the best for her daughter, and that's like Emily and Lorelai to a T. Like, Emily is controlling, and it doesn't matter necessarily if she's doing things out of love for Lorelai or Rory, if she's overstepping boundaries, if she's being cruel or controlling. But, even Emily has her issues with Richard's mom, Trix, right?
Yeah.
The original Gilmore. Yeah. So it's like a multi-generational, how do you deal with your mom? How do you deal with your daughter?
Oh my God, sorry.
And I see we have our co-host here, Suzanne's cat.
I will post pictures of Fez on our Instagram.
Yeah, we'll do an interview with Fez too, maybe. We have a lot of plans for the future of the podcast.
Okay, sorry, where were we?
But I think we can move on to our next main moment, which I would say we could talk about two sort of parallel main moments, which is just like it's like a day in the life, basically. Like Lorelai and Rory are both having a bad day. That's sort of the structure of the episode, and we're flipping in between Rory trying to navigate her first day at Chilton and Lorelai trying to navigate basically like the re-entry of Emily into her life, and how Emily, I in some ways it's a bit heartwarming that she wants to be so involved now that she is involved again, but her, we could call it a love language, we could call it a communication style, whatever it is buying a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Just buying so much stuff. Like she has the money, she has this wealth that she wants to provide for Rory in a way that I think it's really interesting that earlier you said Rory is perhaps living out this life that Lorelai chose to leave. And I definitely see Emily picking up on that. Like Emily almost immediately sees a granddaughter who is totally willing to embrace a lot of the lifestyle that Emily wanted for Lorelai. So I think in some ways it's like, oh, I have a granddaughter I can buy a uniform for, and she's going to wear it to school. She's not going to like try to sneak out of school or sneak out of a uniform. A lot of different stuff, but that of course doesn't go well with Lorelai, who's so proud, rightfully so, of how much she's been able to keep Rory out of that kind of exclusive lifestyle, and she's been able to provide for her. So it just really rubs Lorelai the wrong way when Emily is doing things like buying Rory uniforms. The breaking point is when Emily wants to buy them better internet for the house, which I would kind of like, to be honest, but I understand why it's a huge overstepping kind of moment.
Yeah. Also, like, this was, in 2000, so, like, I don't think my family had internet except dial-up at that point. Maybe we were just starting to get DSL or something. So yeah, that would definitely be like a huge change in lifestyle that we just completely forget about today. But it reminded me a lot, their relationship here with like the money and gift giving and everything. I have 3 siblings who have all had babies or children in the last few years, and the amount of like parenting advice that they get from people is just crazy. And it kind of feels like Emily here is like making up for lost time and just like adding all of these things she could possibly do just to have some impact on Rory's life. But yeah, it's definitely overstepping. Although Dean does get Rory a car, so
yeah, I think we're just beginning to open what is a really long book we could read about like the money and wealth aspects of the show, and how on one hand it is a show about a family that is, I don't know, I guess Lorelai maybe we could say is like middle class or slightly lower, maybe becomes like middle class as the show goes on. So it's interesting to like have like a family as the center of a show that does have money as a concern. But then there's also so many other elements we'll see about just like people who have a lot of money, or sometimes like things that aren't totally explained perhaps. Like, okay, if Lorelai and Rory, are of a more modest income, how can they afford to eat at Luke's all the time? Or just like other things like that. Like money is definitely like money and class is a central, I think, interest of the show, and it begins really early on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, which also we can see playing out in Rory's first day at Chilton, when she comes in as, she doesn't have a scholarship, but she could be, like, a lot of times I feel like you would see people like her referred to as scholarship students in a private school like this. Maybe she should have gotten a scholarship, but she's like a lower income person. She's from a public school, and she's coming in and she meets, I guess she doesn't properly meet these people, but they insert themselves into her lives. And the most important of those is Paris, who is, I think, one of the coolest characters, although she's absolutely terrible at the very beginning. And she's kind of terrible throughout, but in a lovable way by the end. But we meet Paris and her two sidekicks, Louise and Madeline, who I don't even remember if they're named in the episode. Like, one of them is kind of a ditzy rich girl, and the other one's a snobby rich girl. And then we also meet Tristan, who's just a snobby rich guy who I can't see without thinking of that Hilary Duff movie, The Cinderella Story, when he was much nicer by the end.
Right. And I think of One Tree Hill, which I believe is the show that took Tristan away ultimately from Gilmore Girls. Perhaps he would have had a longer arc if not for that casting, but I'm eternally grateful for that casting because I despise Tristan, and if I'd had to see him longer than I did in this show, or as it is, I would have been pretty angry.
Yeah, I also, he definitely does add to some storylines later on, but I really don't think he's that necessary because, and this is going to be jumping way ahead, but the bad boy persona is done more with Jess and much better with Jess, like that kind of conflict between Rory, the good girl, and her supposedly good boyfriend Dean. So I don't really know why we have Tristan here, except maybe just to be a counterpart, like a foil, a private school foil for Dean.
Yeah, I think a private school foil for Dean is a perfect way to describe perhaps why Tristan is brought in at all in the second episode, because I was a bit surprised that Rory's crush for Dean was so strong that it made her consider not leaving public school. Mm-hmm. So then, a few days later, meet Tristan, and we don't hear mention of Dean at all throughout that entire episode. I don't know if that's more so something of Rory's doing, or if it's more like the show. I'm kind of curious on the writing end of it, why not have Dean in this episode? Perhaps there's too much going on, but yeah, I was like, oh, we had Dean a minute ago, now we're on to Tristan. What is going to happen for episode 3? I haven't rewatched it yet, so I don't remember, but
yeah, it's also interesting, looking at Dean versus Tristan in their first interactions with Rory. Dean has been creepily, honestly, observing her for a long time, and he knows her personality pretty well just from his observations, whereas Tristan, he observes her as well, and makes a judgment of her and starts calling her Mary, which is ridiculous and super, super sexist. So they both observe and then make judgments of her, and she ultimately, I guess, picks the right one, the one who's less of an asshole, although I don't understand how anybody could be expected to pick Tristan after how he treats her at the beginning.
Right. Say what we will about Dean, and we'll say a lot of things, but the way that Dean first speaks to Rory, as you say, it's kind of creepy the way he's been watching her, the way she's bent down to pick up books, and we just see the camera pan up his whole body before we see his face to tell us oh, this is a really tall person. I'm not sure, but in that conversation they have, Dean, Rory makes a joke about, I think it was Rosemary's Baby. She quotes from, I think it was Rosemary's Baby, and yeah. Dean says good taste in reference to complimenting her sense of pop culture knowledge, which I think is the ultimate compliment you could actually give to a Gilmore girl like Lorelai or Rory. Mm-hmm. He actually is he is seeing something in her that is a true aspect of her personality. So I have to give him credit for that. And later on, he also compliments how focused she is when she's reading, which is another I will give it to him. Fantastic compliment to give her. Compared to, as you said, Tristan calling her Mary is just so sexist, so devoid of any knowledge of her actual character. And it's just so condescending, so rude. I can say so many things about it, but, because later on I might diss Dean in a lot of different ways, but I was reflecting on these first episodes, at least he is better than Tristan in these ways.
Yeah, Rosemary's Baby was the only one with Dean, which, yeah, was a very good introduction for him to make, especially because, yeah, that is like the main currency for Rory and Lorelai is their references for everything, which most of them I don't understand. But okay, do you think we should finish up our slowdown for these 2 episodes? The only other people that we meet are some of the characters of Stars Hollow. So we meet Babette, who I'll reprise in my gazebo moment later, and Maury. They're an amazing couple. We meet Miss Patty in the first, and I guess she's in the second one as well. And then we meet Mick, who we later know as Kirk. I really don't know why they made that name change. Kirk, I think, works much better, but he's a wonderful character.
I agree. That was something before we started to record the podcast, when we had both rewatched and been taking notes, we immediately told each other, like, did you notice Kirk, who is a beloved character of us as well as, I think, anyone who watches Gilmore Girls, we're like, he was called Mick. And so, I mean, that changes, but it was really funny and interesting that his name, Mick, is actually kind of similar to Kirk, but they rename him and make him an established community member of Stars Hollow, entering into that whole cast of characters, which I don't think we've met Taylor quite yet. There's a few, maybe a couple others that make up the heart of Stars Hollow, that becomes like, this is a show that in some ways isn't always about plot, and it's about like character, community, fun little moments. And there's some of the best ones are with that whole Stars Hollow group that we're just beginning to meet, and we'll grow to love them.
Yeah, we're gonna have to keep track of when Mick becomes Kirk, because I can't remember. We'll have to see. I'm sure it happens in the first season, but
I can't imagine a Stars Hollow without Kirk, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, agreed. We interrupted this podcast with a message from our sponsor.
Have you ever been to an event where the organizers skimped on the most important thing, the music? Drella Harps On is the solution to a dull birthday or a flopped function.
Call Drella Harps On at drellaharpson.com to book Drella and her harp to liven things up. Drella Harps On specializes in Metallica, Guns N' Roses, Broadway ballads, and Heart. Note, Drella does not take requests.
To get a 10% discount on any event over 1 hour, visit drellaharpson.com/talkingfast or use the code TALKINGFAST at checkout. That's Talking Fast at checkout for 10% off events over 1 hour.
Note, Drella does not play at the following functions: weddings, birthdays, bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs, church events, fundraisers, events with more than 13 people, events that are longer than 1 hour, events without tables arranged in a circular pattern, or events that require classical harp.
Okay, yeah, I think we successfully slowed things down, hit up all those main moments of those first 2 episodes, and now I think we can move on to our next segment that we will typically have, which is going to be what we'd like to call Rory's bookshelf and Lorelai's closet. So this is a segment that allows us to discuss all of the pop culture references in Gilmore Girls. We can't mention all of them, of course, because it's an encyclopedia of such fun references. But we do want to hit up some of the main ones that are our favorites that we notice. And we also, as I mentioned, want to discuss Lorelai's closet, which is meant to just say, to take a look at the fashion of this show, particularly Lorelai's, but we're also happy to talk about any other characters that have notable fashion moments. But Suzanne, if you had to name one sort of shout out pop culture reference for Rory's bookshelf, what would it be for you?
So as I said, I tried to write down all of them, and there are quite a few books that she mentions, but the 2 that stood out the most to me weren't books because I feel like they're ones that'll be more recognizable to most people, especially now. The first one is RuPaul, which in 2000, I mean, I was only like 10 years old, so obviously I also didn't watch this when it was airing, but I would have had no idea who that was. And I feel like RuPaul has just become more and more of a pop culture person as time has gone on. The other one was Eminem, and I think so. This was mentioned when we learned that Lane actually likes, rock music and stuff, which is funny because Eminem's not really rock music. But I thought it was really funny because I think I was raised super Christian, and so when I was growing up, a lot of the music I listened to was like Christian rock and stuff. And I think one of the first secular artists I tried to convince my parents to let me listen to was Eminem, which is weird. It's not my taste at all. But he was so popular at that time, so it tickled me. What were your standout references?
Well, first of all, I enjoy that you picked up on the Eminem. I also noticed that, and there's just something very comical about imagining Lane of all people listening to Eminem. And I think she does, I would say, have better music taste than that, but maybe sometimes you have to wonder if the reference is made for the reference sake in the show. But what I noticed, because I am, I read a lot of American literature for school, I thought it was funny to me that Rory mentions reading Moby Dick by Herman Melville of her own volition. Like, this is not assigned for class. This is something she's reading on her own. She makes a joke about how it's kind of stereotypical to pick Moby Dick as the first Melville, which shows not only it shows a knowledge that of Melville that is deeper than a lot of other people. And I just was thinking, it also made me think back, like thinking about Eminem made you think about at that time, was I aware of Eminem? This reference made me think, when I'm nerdy, I've read Moby Dick now, but when I was Rory's age in high school, I would never have even attempted to read Moby Dick. And this is something that continues. As much as I love every book she mentions, sometimes I'm just so mind blown at the fact that she chooses to read those things. She seems to get a lot out of them. She seems smart. I think there's a bit of this prodigy aspect to Rory that I think we're supposed to buy into, or the show wants us to buy into. And so it's things like this reference that she's read Moby Dick as a way to get us to be oh my gosh, it's almost so hard to believe that that reference really did it for me in these first two episodes.
That's also such a hard book to just read with no guidance, or not for a class where you're going to talk about things. Just reading through Moby Dick straight, it's not very straight, but it's also so long, and the plot is kind of there and not there. I don't know. That's just admirable, I guess. Good job, Rory.
Good job, Rory. Now, let's move on. Let's take a look into Lorelai's closet here. A lot of different outfits. Although apparently her closet was empty because her dry cleaning was gone. Every single suit she owns was apparently at the dry cleaners. Were there any notable fashion moments for you in these first two episodes?
There were. So again, in the first episode, and it's not something that Lorelai wears, actually. It's something that one of Rory's classmates at Stars Hollow High is wearing, and she's wearing a patchwork jean jacket. And I remember those when I was growing up. I wanted a pair of jeans that were patchwork jeans, which is it looks so weird. I can't believe we ever wore those seriously. But I begged my mom for a pair of those jeans for so long, and I think maybe in 5th grade or something, she finally got me a pair, and they were so uncomfortable. I don't think I ever actually wore them out in public. Oh my Yeah, it's such a weird trend. Did you have any fashion moments?
Yeah, so we already discussed the outfit Lorelai puts on to go to Chilton, which is one that is seared into my memory. So that was certainly one. But I noticed one of the very first outfits at all was that Rory wearing that sweater in the first episode. It's like this cable knit white, huge oversized sweater that is honestly probably in fashion now. But it looks so cozy. It gives me such a New England sweater sort of vibe that has had a cultural moment recently with Knives Out and the sweaters worn by all of the characters in that movie. I was thinking about, her sweater as being something I really wanted to wear, not on this 88-degree day like we've said, but in a few months. It was also interesting, though, that Lorelai made fun of it a bit when they talk later on, which isn't always something you see. Perhaps I'm misremembering. I remember them agreeing on style more often, but again, I'll have to watch more to see if there's more sort of jabs at each other's style, which is also fun. They do clearly have two very different senses of style, Rory and Lorelai. So that'll be something that's interesting to track as well.
Yeah. I did just remember one last reference that I want to mention, which was something with Miss Patty in the second episode. She tells her dance students to keep the Harry Potter book on their heads for posture. And I worked out, I'm pretty sure this would have been Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire because it was large, so it would keep their posture. But I think this was early enough that it wouldn't have been 5, 6, or 7. So as a Potterhead, although now that's full of all sorts of different difficulties with J.K. Rowling being terrible, but this did warm my heart a little bit to see those kids walking around with Harry Potter on their heads.
But I really enjoy that reference as well.
Miss Patty's comedic gold, I think.
I agree. As you said, I'm trying to look through my notes now to see if I had missed any other pop culture references. That's certainly a challenge that I will try to get better at as we continue the podcast. When it comes to taking notes during this show, if I wrote down every single reference, I'd be taking notes constantly, which is both exciting but also stressful in a way. So I'm trying to keep out my eyes for Rory's bookshelf. It's an uphill battle, but a really satisfying one too. I'm willing to do that workout. But okay, we can continue on, trek forward. I mentioned just a second ago that what really appealed to me about that sweater of Rory's was its coziness, and that it evoked this New England, Stars Hollow, Connecticut aesthetic for me. And this is something that brings us to another segment of ours, which is picking up on the different places and aesthetics of this show. The Stars Hollow vibe that we all love, that calls to us every time it's fall and we start to smell snow. This really positive affect that the show gives us. And so we fittingly call this Welcome to Stars Hollow. And I'm excited to talk about the first few places that we see in the first 2 episodes. I'll, hand it back to you, Suzanne. I sound like a newscaster all of a sudden. Now on to Suzanne with the weather in Stars Hollow. What stood out to you? What was like the first sort of cozy aesthetic moment that you were excited to see?
I had a lot for each episode, so I tried to narrow things down. And for the first episode, I think one of the things that I like the most about Stars Hollow, and that, if I lived in Stars Hollow, I would frequent often, was Kim's Antiques. And I don't think that this place gets enough airtime, because it's a little treasure trove of just random things. I would get lost in there. I mean, I don't have money to buy antiques, but I would just go and stare at everything. Plus, it seems like it'd just be a very strange experience to be in that store.
But didn't you hear Mrs. Kim said everything's half
No.
off?
It's probably like $250 instead of $500 for a chair. Because James Adam or John Adams. John Adams or James Adams? Is one of those a beer and the other one is a president?
John Adams, then Sam Adams for the beer. Right. That was, I agree. I loved the first entrance into the Mrs. Kim's antique shop, and the over here joke was really successful. I was definitely laughing. Over here, where? Meet in the kitchen. And then Rory, her sounding so disappointed when Lane said Rory was there. It was really comedic.
Yeah. I wish we got more of Mrs. Kim and her mysterious husband who shows up in the revival, I think. I don't remember. Mm-hmm. So what were some of your cozy moments other than the sweater?
Yeah, the sweater was very cozy for me. I have to say just the first few seconds of the show actually had me thinking about the aesthetics of Stars Hollow, because it pans in this sort of, I don't think we necessarily get a lot of shots like that in the future episodes, although we'll see as we go, but it's like there's a camera in the sky, which feels like a big production to kind of go over the streets of what we will come to know is Stars Hollow. And it's this very sort of classic looking, almost like my town had a downtown area that looked slightly like Stars Hollow. Not nearly as good, but you get the impression that is that whole town. It's like so quaint, so whimsical. So I just want to go. I want to walk on the streets. Like we see people kind of milling about, and then the camera like continues to lead us into Luke's, which is like one of the places we'll be in the most often. And it just immediately is a town that I would like to visit, basically. And knowing what I know about it now, it made me so excited to see it and think, okay, finally we're here. We're in Stars Hollow. I say finally, even though it's like the opening scene of the show. But it's just interesting to me, like some shows feature landscapes, scenes of the town, just as background, as filler in between. But I think in this case, we meet the town first rather than the characters, not just for a pretty opening to the show, but like the town is a huge part of the show. That's why it's first, you know. So I was so happy to meet Stars Hollow at the start with that really cinematic, I thought, portrayal and introduction.
Yeah, I agree. I also really wish that there was a map of Stars Hollow, because I had a question that I had in my notes here, especially in episode 2 where they seem to kind of have their set like figured out, especially the house and everything. I am so confused by the street layout and their house layout, especially. Is it on a street? Is it off a street? Does it have a driveway, or is it just a lawn? It's super confusing. And this might be something that just comes from me being from the Southwest and not being familiar with New England town structure. Like, this might be a totally normal thing to have a house that just seems to be like off the edge of town. I don't know. But I'm always so confused about where this house actually is in relation to everything else.
I would love to know the layout as well. I would love to see the map that you would like to see as well. I think you're perfectly right to be confused, because I am too. And they walk to Luke's all the time, so they have to be close. I don't know. I think that's something I want to keep an eye out for, trying to get a firmer sense of place as the show goes on, because you're right. I can't quite tell what is like a bit shaken up between these episodes, and the fact that like they probably filmed the pilot at a different time. They're starting to get like sets established later on. Perhaps they get new sets because they have more money. I'm not really sure, but I was definitely noticing things look different. And there's certain sets that are not there quite yet, that I definitely want to keep an eye out for that. Maybe we can start to make a map of our own for Stars Hollow.
That'd be cool.
And share it once we get a better sense of things.
Yeah, that'd be cool. I always, like, in one episode, probably like in season 5 or something, they rename all the streets, and I feel like there's a map there, but we don't really get a view of it. I've always been a little bit bitter. We should understand.
Yeah. Yeah, as you were talking about the map, I thought of that episode as well, where they rename all the streets. It's very funny. They have the dragonfly at that point, so I think it is later on, definitely. But speaking of Lorelai's house, I did want to bring up 2 points. One is really quick in that I also had a question about, like, okay, so we get the sense Lorelai, her first job was as a maid, and then she's clearly, like, worked her way up. It seems like they have perhaps, like, I guess my question is, I'm trying to say is, like, their house is really nice, it seems to me. And it makes me wonder how she was able to afford it and at what point. Is this kind of like a discrepancy in the show where, like, in real life Lorelai maybe couldn't have had that house, like, or did she make enough money, and perhaps the problem with Chilton was, like, she couldn't have that much right at once. It's a bit different perhaps to pay a mortgage on your house than to suddenly upfront pay tuition with, like, a ton of zeros behind it. But I was kind of like, wow, that's a really lovely, lovely house, and it looks really expensive to me almost.
Yeah, I wonder if it's, like, one of those things, like, where people have figured out how much, like, the apartments in Friends would have actually cost and how none of them could have afforded that. Because, yeah, I agree, especially in the economy these days. Like, we could never afford a house like that unless we were making like $70,000 or more a year, I'd say, because you'd also need to, like, save up for a down payment. And I don't feel like, maybe by the point that we enter the story, Lorelai's making kind of that much, but if she started as a housekeeper, it probably took her a long time and had a baby while she was, like, on just that salary.
Right. Yeah, so that was my first question about the house. But then my second observation, I thought, earlier you mentioned we will have a foil between Tristan and Dean. Another foil I thought was fascinating was between Lorelai's house and the Gilmore family house. I think, and there's a lot of moments where the camera is, like, spending time on the different features of these homes and how I think they're meant to really reflect a lot of the lifestyle choices of each individual family. Not only choices, but also class as well, which isn't really a choice, but more so just a factor of life. But some of the choices that Lorelai has made is, like, this mantle above, I think it was a fireplace, that had a lot of photos of her and Rory. Really, like, to reuse the word cozy is perhaps one thing I could say, but they're very, like, informal, eclectic collections of the two of them, versus what you see at Gilmore's, which I noticed was, like, this really huge framed official portrait of Richard, Emily, and a younger Lorelai. It could not be a different setting or aesthetic, and I think it really shows that both Lorelai and Emily are very focused, I think, on producing the kinds of families that they want, and those two families could not be more different. Did you have any thoughts, now that I'm bringing it up, about, like, the two different houses as, like, physical spaces that are communicating things to us?
Yeah, now that you bring it up, I really think, like, there was one scene that I noted down as a cozy scene, which is when they go in and look at, like, I think it's when Lorelai and Suki are drinking wine out on the porch of Lorelai's house, and there's, like, fairy lights, and it just looks so comfy and cozy. And then juxtaposed next to when Lorelai goes to Emily and Richard's house, and she's like sitting outside by her car, and you just see like a stone gate, and behind that a stone faced house. And it really really exemplifies their different personalities, and how they portray themselves to the world, really.
That's a great comparison to make, like this welcoming open porch full of like chatter and wine and music and painting nails, or this really stony enclosed space that is the Gilmore's house, with very like foreboding largeness too, of just like the physicalness of that opening shot we see behind the wall is like a huge house. Very, very cool. And we'll get to know these spaces even more, as the episodes go on. I like have such strong memories, as if I had been to either of those houses, of like just seen so many scenes in both of those places.
I also, this is just a complete aside, but I really think in these first couple episodes they were playing around with layout inside of the houses, because they're just like tiny things that are different, and like once they get that established, it basically never changes after that. So something to keep an eye out for, details.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
We interrupt this podcast with a message from our sponsor.
These days the world is very connected. Too connected. In fact, here at Kirk Industries, we believe the world needs to become less connected, and we have just the tool for that.
Mix DSL will slow down your life, giving you more time to stare into space or at very pixelated images. Waiting has become underrated, but Mix DSL will give you back that feeling of anticipation and frustration that comes with being a step above dial-up.
And Mix DSL now has a special low-demand price for you to get DSL set up in your house. For only $75 a month, you can get DSL installed by an expert in DSL installation, Mick himself. And today, with the code TALKINGFAST, you can get 50% off the added $150 installation fee.
To take advantage of this offer, call directly to 1-800-DSL-MIC. That's 1-800-DSL-MICK, MIC, and mention Talking Fast to our customer service representative, Kirk. That's code Talking Fast for a 50% discount on the installation fee for Mix DSL. Okay, yeah. Do you want to take us to our next segment?
Sure. So our next segment is Friday night dinners, which is in keeping with the actual theme of Friday night dinners, moments to critique. So we're going to pick out a couple moments from these episodes that we would critically look at and just kind of, question, especially in the world of 2021 versus 2000, and how things have changed, and what is appropriate and what is not, what we would change if we were re-scripting these shows now. So did any moments stand out to you as moments of critique?
My first sort of critique I would offer in our Friday night dinner segment is a critique of the show and its writing of teen girls, actually. So I'll explain that a little bit. I think that this is from a scene where we see Rory at high school, and it's like, I think the writers of the show, like Amy Sherman Palladino, is setting up this binary between Rory as this like good girl, that's like the kind of the trope character we could describe her as, versus like the cool girls at school who are seen not doing the homework in class, painting their nails, gossiping. And I think the show wants us to view them as like shallow, superficial, like vapid, as a really way to be like, this is everything Rory is not, and look how cool, look how good Rory is. And I think it's just a little unfair to have that I think it's a too simplistic binary of like what girls can be. I think it's great that they like to paint their nails and talk, and that class was a really boring class. They were just told to read or write their paper. It's not like even an engaging class at all. So I think my critique is just like, you could do better. You could make a more complex set of teenage girls. Like, there's so many different ways for girls to be, and we don't have to like paint one way as, you know, being inherently bad, because I don't think it is. As we mentioned, like Lorelai and Rory paint their nails in the next episode. That like, it's just yeah, I think that my critique was like, this could be complicated, and it needs to be, I think.
Yeah, it really feeds into kind of just a sexist way of not allowing women to have multi dimensions in their personality and to like what they like without judgment. Because, like, if you want to be, you know, like Rory, then apparently you can't care as much about fashion or these kind of frivolous things that the other girls like. And it just, yeah, it limits them in a way that they don't need to be limited. That actually...
Completely. Yeah. Oh, sorry. I like that you point out, like, it's okay to like what you like, and when teenage girls like things, sometimes they're looked down on for that. And it's just like, no, don't categorize someone as basic because a lot of other people, like a lot of other teen girls like something either. It's like, they like it because it's good, because they like it. But yeah, I'm getting off, you know, maybe this is the nature of a Friday night dinner. You start to get a little heated. You start to make things a little uncomfortable as you're just spewing on and on about your feelings and your critiques. But what is something you would like to bring to our dinner to critique?
Mine was actually very much on the same lines. I almost thought for a moment that you had stolen my critique. But mine is really kind of looking at the Mary idea, like when Tristan calls Rory Mary, and Lorelai kind of laughs it off and explains that it's a way of identifying her as like a goody girl, or I think what it really means is they're identifying her as a prude, and they're giving another binary for women, which is something that goes all the way back to the medieval period, which is the Madonna versus whore ideal, which is you can either be this holy, good, angelic woman, or you are a whore. Like, there's no in between, and you can't like things from either side. You have to be one or the other. And I actually think that Lorelai's comment on Rory's sweater, when she like jabs at her for being in this huge sweater and it looks like a muumuu or something, I think that this is kind of playing into it. And I kind of think that the first two episodes are building Lorelai and Rory as these binaries. Rory as the actual Mary, the Madonna, and then Lorelai not necessarily as the whore, but she is the one who is sexualized right away. And thankfully, this is definitely complicated as we go on in the show. But I think, yeah, it's something that we still see a lot in media, especially like women can't be, they just like you said, they can't be like within these gray areas. They have to be one or the other. And that's just not real. That's limiting what women are and what they can be.
That it begs the question, is the show aware of this framework? Are they critiquing it themselves, or are they using it as a structuring like logic behind the show and their characters? And I don't think that's a yes or no answer to that, because in some ways I do think they are critiquing things, and that they really go interesting places with gender roles. Like the fact that Lorelai is so sexy and into sex and dates so often is an exciting thing to see for someone who's like a mother kind of role. But at the same time, that just because they're, you know, doing something progressive with one aspect of the show doesn't mean that there are these like logics under things. Like, no, it's not okay. But I think that's something I'm excited to track throughout as we're watching more episodes.
Yeah, it definitely becomes much more complicated. And I do wonder, that's a good point about whether they were conscious of this, because Rory and Lorelai are this, like, Rory's the same age that Lorelai was when she got pregnant, and Rory's this good kind of, like, virginal girl, and then Lorelai got pregnant at the same age. Like, there is that complete opposition. But then, as we see, both of them become much more dynamic characters and make a lot of choices that aren't, like, on that binary for women. So we'll have to see. Yeah.
We definitely will.
Should we move on to our final segment, which is our gazebo moments? These are our favorite moments from each episode, and this is actually a great way for you all to communicate with us. After we talk about our gazebo moments, we'll ask you for yours. So these are moments that we would tell each other if we were sitting at the Stars Hollow Square gazebo, recapping what has happened and saying, like, this was the highlight of my day. So what were your gazebo moments for these episodes?
Yes, I'm so excited to go to the gazebo. I can picture us there now. So what I want to highlight is first that my favorite moment from these episodes, it happened in both episodes because it is the title sequence or the intro or the credit scene. I don't really know what to call it right now, but the perfect song, like Where You Lead I Will Follow, is just, it's so perfect for their relationship. It's just it's a good Carole King song. Like, it's good on its own. It's perfect within the context of the show. I love the different scenes that they put in this sequence. It's a really good montage of the different characters. I love the font. Like, I love everything about it. It's just quintessential Gilmore Girls for me. It's one of, I would never skip that introduction, as some people say. Like, the hallmark of a good intro is whether or not you would skip it now that we stream everything. I would never skip this one. It's like the ultimate gazebo moment in a way, because it's in every single episode. So I'll never say it again, but I wanted to say it in our first episode. Like, oh, so good. I love it.
I have to admit that I skip it.
What?
But it's not because I don't like it. It's just because the music comes off it's like so much louder than the dialogue. So either mute it or skip it. So sorry, I'm disappointing you.
I guess that's why it's my gazebo moment. I forgive you.
I'll work to earn that. My gazebo moment, so I narrowed it down to one out of both of the episodes, and it's actually one line spoken by an underrated character, Babette, when, what's his name at this point? Mick, shows up to install DSL for Lorelai. Babette says, "Gnome kicking says a lot about a man's character." And I love that line. I think it should be on t-shirts and mugs, and yeah, Babette's just wonderful. She's full of one-liners. And I love gnomes. I just have to say, everybody should have a garden gnome, so it really does say a lot.
I am so glad you picked out that line. I also wrote that down as one of my contenders, actually. I think, yeah, you're so right. Maybe we can put it on t-shirts someday, because it's such a good line. And Babette is such a fantastic character.
Yeah.
With so many good lines. I had a chance to look at my notes. I also recalled earlier I struggled quite a lot to remember what Protestants like, according to Suki. And Protestants like oatmeal.
Wouldn't it be Quakers that I like oatmeal? Quakers oats.
I think so.
Well, close enough.
Which just, yeah, Suki is not, a historian. She's a fantastic chef, which we didn't talk enough about, but we'll have further times to, salivate over all of the food that she cooks throughout the show.
Yeah, peach sauce sounds so good.
As Suzanne mentioned briefly before, now that we've shared our gazebo moments, we would love to hear from all of you listeners as well. Please send us your gazebo moment from these episodes in a 1 minute or so voice memo to our email, which is talkingfastpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that was talkingfastpodcast@gmail.com. And I would be remiss if I did not ask you, of course, to please rate, review, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you like the episode, we would really appreciate it. And we'd love to, start to see that we have a little community we're building with the podcast. Yeah.
And that's a wrap. Bye for now.
Yeah, goodbye. Let's talk about Gilmore Girls this time next week.